Okay, let's get started, everyone. Welcome. I hope you had a good lunch. This session is AX 2012 to Dynamics 365 for Operations upgrade. If that's not the session you're expecting, now's your chance to escape. There's a session immediately after this session in the same room, which is a deep dive on the same topic on 2012 upgrade. So this first session will give you an overview of the end-to-end process, what to expect, and then that follow-on session will give you a bit more developer-y kind of information for it. My name's Tarek. I'm the program manager for Upgrade from the Dynamics 365 for Operations R&D team. And this is my colleague, Paul.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Wu. I'm a solution architect from the solution architecture team. We work with the upgrade team very closely on 2012 customer upgrades. So if you guys have customers who are on 2012, most likely we'll be working with you very closely on your upgrades. Just want to introduce myself, hand it over back to Tarek.
Thanks, Paul. Mic drop. Okay, so a bit of what to expect. You haven't, or you shouldn't have seen much, if anything, about AX 2012 to Dynamics 365 for Operations upgrade, because we haven't released it yet. And we're still working on some of the aspects of it at the moment. We plan to release it in July this year, coinciding with the next major app release from us. There will be a preview before July, and you can register your interest for the preview at that orange link. If you sign up for the preview, it doesn't guarantee that you will get it. We're looking for a spread of customers across different industries, different use of our functionality and what have you, to give us a good base for testing before we release it to the rest of the world. So I apologize if you apply for it and you don't get it. Earlier versions of AX 2012 will follow after that, after July. We want to kind of stabilize it with R3 first before we start throwing R2 and pre-R2 out there. The delta for us to be able to deliver R2 isn't that big. It's just some more data upgrade scripts, effectively. The process itself will be the same no matter what version. It's purely for that reason of giving us a kind of staggered rollout so that we don't do one massive hit and potentially discover all the bugs in all the versions all at the same time. So, as I mentioned, it's not released yet. The things that you see in this session, some of the examples where I've got screenshots of reports or screenshots of outputs of the tool, that stuff is likely to look a bit different when it comes out. They're either things in the middle of development or they're wireframes, they're mock-ups, where they're still being developed. The basic bones of it, how the end-to-end process sits and the phases in the process will be the same. But the details will change a bit. So, for this first session, what I want to show you is a full end-to-end for a customer doing an upgrade project from AX 2012 R3 to Dynamics 365 for Operations. So within that, the bits that we'll concentrate on are where we've developed features, tools, services to help you deal with particular bits of that process. But we will talk about it as a full end-to-end story from the moment that somebody decides, okay, I want to do it, everything that happens, including the non-code related, non-system related pieces of it. So that will let us touch upon the upgrade analysis, which is a tool that we've created, the code upgrade process, just an overview of that, what you can expect to get from code upgrade, and roughly how that thing works. The session following on will talk in a bit more detail about how to deal with some of the things that come up in code upgrade. The data upgrade, how to run that, how that sits, how the data upgrade process works. And we have a validation tool as well, similar to the analysis tool. At the back end of the process, we have a validation process. Now, before I get into that, I would like to do a quick poll. just to see who we have in the audience, because from the sessions I've seen so far, people are saying they'd like it to be more technical. So I want to know who's a developer. Can you put your hand up if you're a developer or have those kind of skills? Coding skills, C++ skills, that kind of thing? Okay. 1, 2. And that looked like almost everybody. Could you put your hand up if you don't have coding skills? That would have been the easier question to ask, wouldn't it? Okay, so we're mostly dev type knowledge. So we'll talk a little bit more technically then about some of the things. Like I say, the session following on will actually go into depth on those. The aim of this is to give you the overview so you know what you're going to get and how those things work. I suppose the next question would be, how many of you have done an AX 2012 upgrade project already, AX 2012 to Dynamics 365 for operations? By that I mean you're an ISV and you've upgraded your solution already. Okay, not that many. Okay, good. Good. Thank you. That helps. Because for ISVs that move their solutions already, they've already been through the code upgrade process. It's the same as if you were a customer. The difference is they're only moving their code, not an entire environment. So, what to expect from AX 2012 to Dynamics 365 for operations upgrade? I'll give you a little overview of what it is to start with, as I think it's completely fresh. So there's a tool to bring forward your code. If you've seen Dynamics 365 for operations at all, you'll know that the way that we store source code is completely different now. We don't have a model store database. We don't, we're keeping source code in XML files. Visual Studio is the thing that reads them. So we have a way for you to take your AX 2012 code base and convert it into Dynamics 365 for operations format, and to help you along the way with reworking your code where it needs to be reworked. We also have data upgrade to bring forward the whole database. This very firmly is an upgrade. It's not like the 2009 migration process, where you bring forward master data and opening balances. This is full upgrade, bring forward the database. What we would have traditionally called like an in-place upgrade. Initial support will only be for R3, AX 2012 R3. As I mentioned already, we'll add R2 later. We want to get it stable with one of the versions first. We had to pick one. We picked the newest. Okay. So, this is a theme of upgrade that you're going to see all over the place, not just in this presentation, in the next presentation, in the tooling, in LCS, in this whole analyze, execute, validate. We're not trying to prescribe how a project runs. We're trying to prescribe a best practice way of approaching an upgrade. So, within the analyze phase, we provide tooling that allows you to, before you've even purchased Dynamics 365 for operations, you could be on a trial, you'll have the tooling available to be able to get realistic estimates for your code base, for your data, for your environment, so that you can realize how big or how small the check is that someone needs to sign to actually commit to the upgrade, you know? The tools that you need to be able to get that upgrade project plan together. In the execute phase, you actually execute on all of those things, actually running the data upgrade, running the validation things, and in validate, it's all about testing. So, probably can't read a word of that. So the intention isn't for you to be able to read this diagram. You'll get the deck through the app. I hope you all have the app. You'll get the deck through the app, and this diagram shows the end-to-end process. You're not expected to be able to read it from here. The large pale blue boxes are basically analyze, execute, and validate. And what we'll do over the next slides is we'll zoom into particular pieces of that where you can read it, and you'll see what elements we have defined within each one. So, analyze. Hopefully that's a bit more readable. So there are three things. What this diagram is also trying to illustrate is the parallelism between tasks that happen in an upgrade project and the dependencies that happen between tasks in an update project. Because it's not as simple as just saying one thing happens after the other and it's 15 tasks long, you know. It's actually wider and there's more parallelism at some points. For the analyze phase, we provide something called what we're tentatively calling the upgrade analyzer, which you run against the AX 2012 environment. It looks at the database, and it figures out from that database things that you can do to reduce the cost of your upgrade, to prepare the database so that it has everything that it needs for upgrade. It's looking for gaps in functionality that you're using that it knows don't exist in Dynamics 365 for operations, and all that kind of stuff. We'll go into it in more detail in a minute, but essentially run it against the AX 2012 database, and it will give you a bunch of tasks to help prepare the 2012 environment. Now, a lot of those tasks are proactive. It's not the case that you have to go and do a bunch of donkey work in the AX 2012 environment. We're trying to be proactive about it. So it's nice to have things that, well, everybody wants nice to have things, right? The second tile down is the code upgrade. So in the analyze phase, the code upgrade tool is basically a tile in LCS. And in the analyze phase, you're running your model store from 2012 through that service, through LCS, to help you to build your estimates for the code upgrade, to know what you're getting yourself into. It will give you a wildly detailed report with all kinds of things that it's found, and it will log VSTS tasks for the outstanding elements, etc., etc. And from that, then, a developer or one of the many people with developer skills can consume that to figure out what the estimates need to be. And lastly, in Analyze, the ability to deploy a sandbox in the cloud, a sandbox environment, so a test environment or a one-box environment, so that you can start to see from the functional side how new features look, whether existing functionality you're using is the same or not, etc., etc. That kind of first-level fit gap type activity. It's still demo data and standard code at that point because you haven't done the other tasks yet, but it still has some value, you know? And lastly, on the right-hand side, all of those things feed into creating your project plan, which unfortunately isn't a tool. That's something project manager just has to do. So, the upgrade analyzer. Basically, this is a tool we run against the AX 2012 environment. It identifies tasks in 2012, as I mentioned, the nice-to-have stuff. It's based on the LCS diagnostic service. So anyone who's familiar with that, essentially then you have a Windows service on the AX 2012 environment. We have a special set of rules and our own report that hooks up to that data that's specifically for upgrading to Dynamics 365 for operations. The kinds of tasks it can identify at the moment, and I kind of stress the at the moment part of that, because it doesn't mean I want to drop things. It means we're picking the low-hanging fruit to start with, you know? The things that are not contentious, that definitely add value to the widest number of people, you know? And then over time, because it's this rule-based engine, we can add rules about anything we want to, you know? It has the ability not just to look in the database, but to look at any aspect of the environment. So we have ideas for other things we would like to add, but we're starting with this set. And you'll see why in the following slides. There's some good reason behind it. So some of the types of things it can do: data cleanup. It will look and see where you can reduce the size of your database. SQL configuration, more because we know that you're leaving the 2012 environment behind, probably by this point. But some of the last things you have to do involve fairly hefty database operations, like copying the whole thing out to another environment. So it's good for us to check the configuration to make sure it's optimal. Deprecated features, where we can see from the database that you're using something in AX 2012 that doesn't exist in Dynamics 365 for operations. So it's just about early visibility and about us being able to give a recommendation on on what the options are to deal with those features that we don't have. And the pre-upgrade checklist, which is, there are some things that a small number of things, one springs to mind at the moment, that you have to do in 2012 before you can come forward. Data that you have to populate before you can come forward. So, this is one of those screenshots which probably won't look anything like this when it's released, but gives you the rough gist of what it is. It's basically just a picture of a report in LCS, similar to the existing kind of diagnostic report. The primary difference for us with this is for each result that you get, we're only showing results where we think you need to do something, which is similar to existing diagnostic. So we hide them where the rule has said it doesn't apply to this customer. But for each result, we're wanting to be able to explain why you care, you know? We're not just giving you a technical result. We want it to be consumable not only by the cleverest developer on the team, but by anybody. They should be able to read it and understand why they care about those results. So the words are hard to read from a distance. You'll be able to read it on the copy that you get. But it's basically explaining, for example, why data cleanup matters. That's the same report as if I've scrolled down, and you see for the results, essentially it explains why the rule was triggered and what the rule means, why you should care about it, and then tells you how you would what the task is that you need to do to take action, where to go in the application, what buttons to press, and so on. Or links away to the relevant article, which tells you in more detail how to take the action. So, the first of those, data cleanup, I said there's a good reason, and I'm sure many of you already will realize what the reason is. In SQL Azure, there's a limit of 1 terabyte at the moment, upper limit on database size of 1 terabyte. You're also allocated database storage space. A customer is allocated database storage space based on a formula that relates to the number of users that they've purchased. So they get a base amount of storage just because they've bought Dynamics 365 for operations, and then for every 20 users they get 5 gig, something along those lines. I think it's exactly that. Over and above that amount, you pay for a storage add-on for every gigabyte over you are. And obviously, if you're an AX 2012 customer, we recognize you may have built up rather a lot of data over time. You could have come from, I don't know, AX3, AX4, AX 2009, all the way through and not cleaned up, and the database could be huge. Maybe it doesn't need to be huge. So what the data cleanup rules particularly are looking at are specific sets of tables where we think you can legitimately save storage space. What I mean by legitimately is without losing functionality, you know? There are some cleanup items where you do lose functionality, and they're not rules for this. We're excluding, like I said at the beginning, we're excluding anything contentious. We're not going to suggest the aggressive cleanups that mean you would lose functionality. Or it would change functionality, not lose functionality. There still is a lot of them, and the vast majority of them are configurable through the application itself. This isn't a set of SQL scripts or anything. It's basically telling you, hey, there's this periodic job you could run, and it will save you this many gigs. So what the report output will give you is the number of megabytes or the number of gigabytes that you could save for each rule, an estimated amount of gigabytes, megabytes that you would save for each rule. It's estimated because technically it's difficult to be that precise about how much the size of the database will shrink because of the way the database is storing stuff on disk. So it will be fairly accurate, but don't count it as precise. And secondly, it's not giving you a dollar amount, because the dollar amount varies depending on the type of contract you have, how you bought the product can change the cost. But the size amount stays the same. So effectively, you would take that size amount. If you're a customer, you would take that size amount, and when you're in the sales process and you find out what the storage add-ons cost you for your particular situation, then you know either what you would save or what you have to pay extra if you don't do it. So I talked a lot about cost. The last thing is, obviously, if you reduce the size of the database, you can potentially significantly reduce the amount of downtime that you need to be able to upgrade that database. Two of the significant pieces in the downtime process are moving the database from SQL Server on-premise into SQL Azure, we'll assume for now that's the deployment approach that you're taking, and it's not Dynamics 365 for operations on-premise. Moving the database into Azure is costly, time-wise, and saving some space can help. Also, then, when you're executing the data upgrade process itself, having a smaller database helps. SQL configuration, I mentioned already. Really, we're including this because it's very simple to include it. It's a quick win. This is, as I mentioned, you're leaving 2012 behind, so it's really about ensuring that those cleanup processes run well and ensuring that the export of the database runs fast and all that kind of stuff. Deprecated features. So, this may be a little bit more contentious because it feels negative to be talking about something that's missing. Yes?
I'm just curious, the SQL config, is that like trace flags, lock pages in memory, stuff like that?
Yeah, so the question was, the SQL config, is it trace flags, lock pages in memory, etc.? Yes, it's basically the same configuration checks we would make if we were doing a performance review on a 2012 environment. Actually, you've hit on an interesting point there, because the data cleanup things, the vast majority of those data cleanup rules are also the same things that we do if we do a performance review in your 2012 environment. We're basically, with this upgrade analyzer, we're trying to get your house in order. You know, the tool is trying to get your house in order. Let's make sure it's as clean and tidy as it can possibly be before we try and do the big operation to it. So deprecated features, it's a simple idea. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you. I was just going to ask, so will that include a purview to any of the SQL requirements from going from 2014 to presumably 2016 in this synthesis software as a service?
Okay, so the question, if I paraphrase the question a little bit, was requirements for the SQL version for 2012 that you're coming from, like will we only take from SQL 2016, for example, forward to Dynamics 365, correct? I'll have to put a pin in that question for the moment, and I can tell you why, though. So we're still evaluating the best approach to moving the database from on-prem to SQL Azure. There are lots of different ways, and we're evaluating all of them. And there are pros and cons of different options. There's no clear winner in our mind yet, and the answer to that question is directly related.
But at least if it has the option or the opportunity to at least analyze, what it would take to move from this model to...
It's possible, yes. So, for deprecated features, it's a very simple feature. What it's doing is looking in the database. It's trying to identify where you've been active, and that area doesn't exist in Dynamics 365 for operations anymore. The idea behind that, I said, it sounds a bit negative to point out that there are some things that are not there, but the idea behind that is you're going to find out. It's much better if you find out on the first day and the tool tells you than you find out in a month's time or 3 months' time or 6 months' time. So what we're wanting to do is flag it as soon the earliest possible opportunity, Maybe you're even in trial mode and you just run, you've just run the upgrade analyzer against your existing 2012. And to give some suggestion, some recommendation about what you could do about that particular area. The thought behind it is, what would the solution architect say? You know? They know the feature's missing. They have to tell you something. Okay, what are my options? What am I going to do? That's what it will try to do. The aim is it will give you the same options that, you know, that your expert would have given you when they realize you were using something that's deprecated. Try and make it a little bit clearer. Try and empower the customer a bit more to know that there is something that they need to deal with and what their options are, or what some of their options are. Now, the pre-upgrade checklist, this is something in 2012, actually in the application. So you have to install a hotfix in the 2012 environment. We were trying to avoid having to install anything in 2012, but we have a reason. We will probably have many reasons as we move forward. There are some features where you need some pre-information before you can upgrade it to Dynamics 365 for operation. And the case in point that I picked for this example is the users. Because you've got AD users in AX 2012 and AAD users in Dynamics 365 for operations, we don't have enough information in all situations to know which user is which in AAD. Now, in some situations you do, and some you don't. Depending on how you configured your AD and your AAD, they might be completely disconnected. Worst case scenario, there's no relation at all. They might have the different syncing options, like a one-way sync, or they might be fully integrated, and then you could just run a widget that would populate values on your on-prem system. So we provide the ability for somebody to go in and add the UPNs, basically. Otherwise, your upgrade will run perfectly well, but no one will be able to log in on the other end. So we were kind of forced. We are trying to avoid, as a principle, we're trying to avoid pre-work like that in the AX 2012 environment, where it's really sort of functional configuration, if you like, in 2012 before you come forward. We're only doing it where it's absolutely necessary, where there isn't another option. The idea being that there aren't that many features that you need to use the first second that you turn on Dynamics 365 for operations. So you still have time to go configure, or the feature should be coded such that it doesn't require you to do that. It will still work in the old way if you've just come forward. Part of that thinking is similar to our attitude to upgrading Dynamics 365 for operations from one version to another. As in, we don't want, we want to maintain backwards compatibility as much as possible. We want people to be able to take an update without having to change everything they do every time. And the way that filters, the way that attitude manifests itself in 2012 is that, basically. So, code upgrade. Code upgrade is a big topic just in itself. When you come to do your first code upgrade, it's a learning curve the first time. It helps if you might be in a situation where you haven't done a code upgrade, but you do have Dynamics 365 for operations coding experience already, and then you're, a bit better off, or quite a lot better off. But if you're brand new, your experience is all in 2012, the first time you do a code upgrade, it really is a learning curve. So there's a lot of content there. So as there's so many people in the audience with developer persona, I'll talk in a bit more detail about that. So basically, there's a service in LCS that will convert your code. That's the code upgrade tool. You only see it in a Dynamics 365 for operations project. It's just a tile called code upgrade. Click it, upload your model store, wait for 40 minutes or so, and you have a report, and you also will have a checked-in version of all the upgraded code. Everything that you had before. Maybe not 100% working, because it can't auto-magically resolve every possible type of conflict, but it does its best. It resolves what it can, and it logs VSTS tasks for the things that it can't resolve. It also produces an Excel report with a huge number of tabs describing different categories of tasks that either it has done or need to be done, that it's identified. And when you're in the analyze phase, really you're just running it, getting to that report stage, and then not going any further. The report's enough to be able to go through and make a kind of rough estimate about how long you think it's going to take. There should be one question about this. People that have been around for a while with Dynamics 365 for operations would have known that we used to give an effort number in the code upgrade report, and we don't do that anymore because the effort number was too contentious. You know, we were trying to say, well, this one will take 1 day, and this one will take 3 days, and so on and so forth. Too many people disagreed with our estimates, so we've hidden it for now. If we find a way to make it more agreeable to the general community, we might add it back. But for the moment, that's why it is the way it is. It gives you all the information you need, and you decide what you believe the estimates are. And for my personal preference, I believe in that approach. I don't believe that we'll get to a place where we're able to actually estimate the effort, because it's too subjective. We can know that a line in a class conflict, or that 5 lines in a class conflict, but we don't know what that means. The code upgrade tool is like a robot, you know. It just knows that 5 lines don't conflict. It doesn't know that that means, oh, actually, you can just delete it and it will all work fine then. They've been superseded. Or this whole big feature needs to be rewritten, or, you know, whatever. Could be any number of outcomes for that. So someone with knowledge of the customer's code needs to look at the report. A little bit of inside the code upgrade tool. So although it's just upload your model store, click a button and wait for it to do it, inside it's doing a bunch of stuff. So it converts your source code into the XML files that we have in the XML source code files that we have in Dynamics 365 for operations. It then takes what would have been overlayering in AX 2012 and converts the overlayer pieces of your code into Delta XML files, which is the way that code is stored in AX7, Dynamics 365 for operations. Trying to train myself not to say the number name. Converts them to deltas. It merges and splits models, which is, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail on a following slide. Essentially, Dynamics 365 for operation code base is like a bunch of separate DLLs that relate to each other. What we're calling packages, like Application Suite, Application Foundation, are a bit like separate DLLs that reference each other. So if you had a customization in your model that touches something Foundation, it needs to be in a Foundation model for that package. If you had something that touched a Suite object, it needs to be split into a Suite version of your model. Effectively, that means for your custom model that goes into the upgrade process, you might get 6 models back, or however many models back, 1 for each of the packages that you've effectively customized. So it does that for you, which is no mean feat in itself if you've ever tried to do it manually. It also runs auto-migration rules. Now again, you know, I talked about we're trying to go the non-contentious route. So it's not aggressive in what it will auto-magically try to correct. It will correct the things it definitely can be sure won't be a problem if it changes them. It doesn't want to start changing code and making it worse than it was in the first place, for obvious reasons. So simple things like if you'd overlaid a menu, it will convert it to a menu extension and delete the overlay that you had on the menu, because there's only one way you could have done that, and it's, you know, it's safe for it to make the change. And some simple things like that it will just do. For anything that it can't do, it will log a task in VSTS and tell you what the conflict was that it found. Outputs the summary report. One thing I didn't mention is it also checks all the code that it created into VSTS for you. So it will create a branch, check all of the code in, and then you're effectively ready at that point to deploy a Dynamics 365 for operations machine, point Visual Studio at VSTS, sync it, and you've got your first environment with your code in it. We'll talk in a minute about what you have to do after that point. That's not to say that you're suddenly running all your custom code and everything works. It's just the beginning of getting it to work. So the reason for this slide is really to give you that orange link. You don't have to take a picture because you get a copy. If it hasn't appeared in your app yet, it should appear soon. I only uploaded the deck in the early hours of this morning, so jet lagged. So on my app it hasn't come through yet, but it should come through in the next few hours. The link, the link there actually walks you through in detail how to configure VSTS and LCS, the permissions you need, you have to do a certificate thing, all this stuff. It's not a long task. If you've already got VSTS accounts, you can use it, and if you haven't, realistically, within an hour, you can go and create an account, go and sign up for LCS, and have your model store sitting there processing. One question that we get when we did code upgrades with ISVs about VSTS was, well, can I use other source control providers? VSTS used to be called Visual Studio Online, or VSO, by the way. Most people still refer to it as TFS, even though it's VSTS. But whatever you call it, that online version of TFS, effectively. Two things. So first, in Visual Studio, as far as tracking Dynamics 365 for operation source files, it's technically possible to use other source control providers. But for our tooling, our integration, like, for example, the code upgrade tool, no, you can't. So that's what you lose. If you're heavily invested in another source control system and you're thinking, oh, I want to stick with that and can't I just make it work with that, you can make Visual Studio work, but you can't make the rest of the tools work. So you lose code upgrade, you have to kind of at least do that as an extra step and then take all the code that it made and put it back in your other thing. We really would rather you used VSTS.
Are you planning to use Git maybe in the future?
The question was, are we planning to use Git maybe in the future? Yes, but we're not committing to that yet. So yes, as a team we like it, we want to do that. It's not officially being done at the moment. So because we like it, it's reasonable to expect that it will happen. The other point on the VSTS thing is normally cost. Do I have to pay for it? What do I have to pay for? It's free for the first 5 users. Users that don't change anything, like just want to view it, are also free. So the 5 users that you get are ones that can actually use it, check code in and all that kind of stuff. For users that don't edit, they're free as well. And any user that has a MSDN license, they also have a VSTS license. So typically for a dev team, like when we've had projects, everyone in the dev team has MSDN anyway. So all of their accounts don't even count as the first 5 free ones because they've got it from MSDN, and you've still got 5 full licenses to play with. So in most cases, you end up not having to pay for it. Yes, there's a question over there.
What if somebody who is involved in testing is also part of the VSTS? Is that for you?
The question was, what about somebody who's involved in testing? Would he also have to use VSTS? And is he a free or a non-free user? I believe he's a free user. I'm 90% sure he's a free user. It's about checking code in and out that you need to have the full license for. The report looks kind of like that. The point of this screenshot, it's not interesting to look at Excel, the point of this screenshot is all of the tabs along the bottom. The code upgrade output report has an enormous amount of information in it. This is an example that was set up to show somebody how to use the code upgrade tool, so it's not on a real model store. It's on a model store that I've deliberately added like 10 changes that exercise the different bits. In in real life, with a customer with a lot of customizations, expect hundreds and hundreds of things to come out. In the next session after this, we'll talk in more. One of the guys will talk in more detail about. Actually, we'll go through the tabs and show what they are and a bit of how to decipher what's in it, because it's all very well saying, well, the code upgrade report is there. You use that to do the estimate, but when you sit down the first time and look at the report, it's maybe not self-explanatory. The last thing on the code upgrade I want to say for now is, if you have third-party or ISV solutions, or the customer has third-party or ISV solutions, ask the third party for a new version of that solution.
Would it be a lot of customizations already against their code, their ISV solution that's already part of your model store at that point? What happens to the analysis against that customized code that runs on top of their ISV?
Yeah, so the question was, what if you potentially have customizations on top of the ISV solution at that first moment, and then what happens to your code? That's actually related to the point. The temptation, so I've been through this. I was on the SA team when we were developing Dynamics 365 for the first time, or AX7, the new Dynamics AX as it was then. And I did this, and I made the mistake of trying to make progress, even though there was no version of the ISV solution, and it was a mistake. In the long run, it cost way more time. So the specific technical reason why it's better not to start working, unless you have very, very separated verticals where you can work on something completely isolated, and even then I would hesitate. The technical reason is, if you can't open the application until everything compiles. It's not like AX 2012, It's a small detail in 2012 or the older versions that if there's a compile error somewhere, everything else still runs. In Dynamics 365 for operations, because it's more sort of .NET based, if there's a compile error, there's no DLL. You can't open the application. So you either, basically the road I went down was, they're still working on their third-party solution, so I want to make progress. But to make progress, I need to be able to open the application. To finish my code upgrade stuff, I at least need to be able to open stuff. I'll just comment out that I'll remove the package, but that breaks things because there's relations between the packages as well. Okay, I'll put it back, and I'll just comment out the bits that don't work, so that's several hours down the line, still doesn't build. And then when it does build, functionality has changed because I've commented out code that's supposed to work. Without going into off on a massive tangent, it's really not worth it. That it's much, much better in the long run. Even if you do all those things, when you do get the version of their solution back, you have to reverse everything you did, which wastes a bunch of time again. It was way more productive to just get the version of their solution up front, get it in there, and then deal with your stuff after that. The question was, can you decide to leave the third party behind? Yes. I tried that too. Effectively creating an AX 2012 model store without that solution in, and then running that through the code upgrade tool. That works. The challenge is when you want to bring it back in again. You're kind of postponing the problem, and any of your code that touched it is broken. Effectively, that 2012 model store that you've got, once you take that solution out, doesn't compile either. It already doesn't compile before you've even upgraded it. The point is just, it's quicker and cheaper to wait and get the solution first. Or decide, maybe even you decide you don't need the solution anymore for whatever. If functionally you don't need it, then that's also an option, obviously. Just to complete analyze, I'm a bit conscious of the time. Just to complete analyze, deploy a sandbox environment. You should have seen there's nothing special about this for upgrade. It's just to complete that end-to-end. You would go and click in LCS and deploy one. One thing I don't think I've mentioned that gets mentioned on this slide is you could be in trial mode all this time. All of the stuff we've talked about, you could still be in trial mode potentially at this point. You could sign up for a free trial as a 2012 customer, a free trial of Dynamics 365, which lets you deploy one-box type environments on your own Azure subscription, a bit like the partner Dynamics 365 for Operations projects, LCS projects that you get if you're a partner. Just to go and let you try stuff out. You still have access to run the code upgrade then. You can still run the upgrade analyzer against your 2012 environment. You can deploy one-box environments so that you can actually log into a demo version of the application, see how things work. If you're in implementation mode, obviously you've been given a project then anyway. And if you're in trial mode, you're all good. So the idea, personally, I'm a fan of the idea that as a 2012 customer, you can do a lot of that analyze stuff before you commit to purchase. You have a much better idea of what you're getting into, how much money this thing is going to cost you, how big your code upgrade looks, how much prep you might need to do or not do, if there are blocking things like the deprecated features, if there are things that might block you, before you have to commit to buying the license. Now, it's not that we're trying to talk people out of buying it, obviously. It's that we want it to be right for them when they do it, you know? There's no point in buying it and then finding these things out later and being upset about it. It's better if you know at the beginning. And then it might mean that you say, okay, well, we'll wait until that feature comes in, or, it seems expensive for us, we'll do it next budget period, or whatever it happens to be. Creating the project plan, nothing to do with our software, just a part of the end-to-end process. The reason why I call that out is because the output from the upgrade analysis, from the code upgrade estimation work, and from having deployed your first Dynamics 365 for Operations environment gives you what you need to be able to create the shell of a project plan. There'll still be unknowns in there, but that document is organic anyway. It will change as the project goes forward. What it will have is enough to be able to plan, to have a plan that you can have a level of confidence in that's reasonably close to how real life will play out. So, there's a lot about analyze. Execute, you'll be pleased to know, isn't that complicated. You're basically just doing all the things you talked about analyzing in the first place. So the diagram is, okay, perform the preparation tasks. Yeah, you run the analyzer against 2012. Now you need to do the things that it told you. It's nothing really different now. Perform the code upgrade. Someone actually go and do the code upgrade tasks. Develop new code is meant to be the relation between having done that basic fit gap with your sandbox environment that you deployed, where you may have discovered new features you wanted, etc. There's another work stream coming from that. Once the code upgrade and the preparation tasks and the new code and stuff are done, or in a relatively complete and functioning state, then you can run the data upgrade. Run the data upgrade in a dev environment first, and then you run it in other environments. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in the following slides. Did I see a tentative hand there somewhere? No? Simple. The point for this is to call out a bit about who those tasks belong to. The data cleanup tasks are, over 95% of them are through the AX client itself. They're not tasks for a developer. They're not tasks for a DBA. It's about configuring batch jobs and stuff in AX. And we're aiming to give you enough information that the output of those rules doesn't descend into rounds of meetings about whether we can or cannot do this cleanup, or it will affect some business process, you know? The feeling is that if the rule doesn't give you that level of detail where it explains really what the impact of it is, then it hasn't done its job. There's no point in raising the question and then not finishing it. So I expect that's fairly streamlined. It's like the application support type person, type persona. SQL configuration is very quick changes. There are I will say there's a bit of a caveat to the SQL configuration stuff. Your DBA may disagree with particular changes, and it's okay if they disagree. There's always some extenuating circumstance for every kind of configuration option like that. If you're doing something particularly unusual, that you might say, no, we have a reason why we won't do it the other way. The task is small again if they do agree, and ultimately, even if you change them and something doesn't run as well as it did before, just change them back. It's a second. It's not like you've just redeveloped all your code and now you're committed and there's no going back. It's just flipping flags back and forward. Obviously, be careful changing things, but worst case is you just have to change them back. Pre-upgrade checklist, adding users, IT task. Deprecated features is the big one. It's the elephant in the room out of those analyzer tasks, because it's not able to close the answer to those questions. It can help, like it will try and suggest what the solutions could be, but it can't tell you the solution is definitely this. It's up to you to decide. So that one will descend into rounds of meetings with people to decide what the appropriate action is. Get new versions of the ISV solutions, did I mention that? Aim for a successful compile first. So I mentioned, part of the reason behind not moving forward when you don't have the new version of the ISV solution is you can't open the application until it compiles. When you're starting with the code upgrade, the right approach is get it to compile. Even what I see a lot of people doing is just one dev will work on it to start with to get it to build, because it's relatively limited what you can do when you can't open the application. And then once it compiles at least, then you can open it out to a bunch of people to work on different areas.
Yep. Regarding just the sequence for the getting the ISV solution, are you saying to take your R3 code that contains the 2012 R3 ISV model, still upload that to for code analysis to Azure, and then contact the ISV for their new or the new plugin or their new model and apply it on the Azure level at that point, or are we saying give their new Azure model and apply it on your on-prem 2012 R3 version in their version?
So the question was, should you be getting the new ISV model and putting it in the 2012 environment first and then bringing it forward, or taking your model store through the code upgrade service and then putting it into the new one into Azure? And it's the latter. You need to take it forward into the other one first. It's realistic to expect that the code for their solution for Dynamics 365 for operations will look very different to their code for AX 2012. And that's not because the functionality is drastically different. In most areas of the system it's not, but it's because most ISVs will have rewritten their solution using the extensions paradigm in Dynamics 365 for operations. So the specific objects that they had will be different objects in the new system. So you wouldn't be able to take the new solution into 2012 even vaguely. Yes?
Is maintaining the element ID still essential, or still an important element of creating the ISV models?
The question was, is maintaining the element IDs... I'm not sure to what you're referring. I can tell you that part of the data upgrade process is that we take the element IDs forward from 2012. So the objects, as they come into to Dynamics 365 for operations from the code upgrade service, will have the same IDs as they did before. We're specifically keeping them intact. Aim for a successful compile first. Start with the lowest package and work upwards. So I alluded to, if you haven't developed in Dynamics 365 for operations, that might not make a lot of sense. Effectively, we have packages, this concept of packages, which is a bit like a collection of models. And they are a unit of build or a unit of compile. So they can be thought of, a package is a bit like a DLL. So some of the big ones that we have, Application Suite is a package, and that's kind of built as a DLL type thing. Application Foundation is one, Application Platform is one, and there are lots of little ones now. We're starting to granularize those. They have relations between each other, but they only have relations in one direction. You're not allowed to have a circular reference. It's difficult to build DLLs if they both reference each other and their code has changed in both sides. So they'll have a reference in one direction, like a hierarchy. Now, starting with the lowest package just means you need to start with the one that doesn't reference anybody else first. Because if you try to build the ones that do reference that one, they're obviously not going to compile when their parent or their child, their parent, doesn't compile. So it's, get the parent to compile and then work your way down the children. Otherwise, what will happen, if you try to build one of the higher ones, you'll get a whole load of spurious errors every time it references anything in one of the other ones that you haven't already fixed, And you'll find as you go through like that, actually, the number of errors comes down, not exponentially, but it comes down in a much healthier way than you might expect. When you start, you're looking at, there's 500 errors in this, and it's going to take a long time. And as you start to methodically work your way through the packages, hundreds of errors will disappear because they relate to the fact that this DLL had references to other ones that were broken. So you're kind of a bit like you're raising the same error in multiple places for one fix. I hope that makes sense. There's a lot of detail to that the first time that you come to it. This bit about understanding the model split implications, basically, I mentioned if you had a model in AX 2012, you've got like Tarek's model in AX 2012, and it's got all my customizations in. And I've overlaid whatever bits of code I needed to for whatever functionality I customized or I created. When it's brought forward into Dynamics 365 for operations, my single model, Tarek's model, will get divided into lots of different models depending on what I'd been overlaying. If I overlaid something in Suite, I'll have Tarek's Suite model. And where I'd overlaid something in Platform, I'll have Tarek's Platform model, and so on and so forth. Depending on what I'd overlaid, the code upgrade tool will have created separate versions of my model that relate to that package. The upshot of that is when you first start going through your code upgrade errors, there are likely to be a lot of errors related to the split. I mentioned the DLLs can only reference themselves in one direction, but your 2012 code could go in any direction it wanted, really. It was like one giant DLL. So although it split your code logically, if you've got something in Platform that's trying to use something from Suite, it will fail just because that's not allowed anymore. That's not the direction. It can only go the other direction. I'm not going to try and explain the model split in any real depth. The point of the reason for mentioning it here is the first time you get to it, it will be that's one of the first parts of the learning curve for a 2012 developer coming to Dynamics 365 for operations and doing a code upgrade. When we do the ISV workshops where we're upgrading people's solutions to Dynamics 365 for operations, we do a whole 10, 20 slides about the model split and explaining how package works and da-da-da-da. And then it's hands-on, that workshop. So people start with their own packages actually going through it. And they're like, why is it compiling? And it's the model split, right? Then we do the 10 slides again. And then it starts to make sense. And I had the same thing myself. It's a bit like the 7 stages of grief, You're, no, this can't be how it works. And then angry, and so on. Till eventually you come to terms with that is how it is and you need to... to be honest, it's different from previous versions of AX, but it's... Compared to the wider world of development, traditional development, .NET, C++, whatever, it's way more traditional. You would expect it to be like that. It's just... something new if you're pure AX and you're coming to Dynamics 365. Now, the last point here, refactor all old code as extensions. You may or may not have seen in another session already this week that in the future we would like to remove overlayering and for everything to be written as extensions. There's good reasons for that. It's not because we want to punish anyone who used overlayering. We did too. It's basically because at the moment we have a problem that customers get themselves into a situation where they can't take the latest version or the latest update of a given version of the product because it's cost prohibitive. The merging effort, the dev effort, to just be able to take standard fixes is too much for them, especially if they leave it for a year or for a couple of years. There's so many updates then, when they do try and take it, it's like a whole project in itself for them to take these updates. And ultimately that boils down to overlayering. The only reason why all the customizations need to be rewritten is because of the overlayering mechanism. When the standard code underneath the overlayer changes to the new version, nothing happens to this. And there's no way of auto-magically making it work because it's a fairly rich language. What you could have done in the overlayer is anything you could dream of. It's like, it's like us trying to estimate the effort, the amount of dev hours it would take to do an upgrade. It's just not possible. It requires a much broader amount of knowledge than a tool can do. Extensions, on the other hand, don't have that problem. If everything is extensions, you can just change the standard version of the code and the custom stuff will keep running the same as it was. You will have seen we've already locked the platform package. So basically we've done that. What the locking of the platform package means is no overlayering on platform X++ stuff anymore, only extensions. We can now, well, technically, we could update the platform in people's environments with no impact to them. And we hope to be in a position where we can do things like that in the future. Like updates can just happen. More like even our own CRM Online or whatever it's Dynamics 365 for something name is for sales. Damn. Even our own services do that, and other ERPs in the cloud do similar things. Maybe not using extensions paradigm, but the principle that an update can just come without you having to spend a load of dev hours every time it comes. So, if you're upgrading from AX 2012 and coming to Dynamics 365 for operations, it makes sense to do the refactoring at that point. Because you're already doing this enormous test pass and all the rest of it, you're getting more value out of the surrounding tasks. Yes, it's extra dev hours, but it's not extra test hours, it's the same test hours because you have to retest everything anyway. You're realizing extra value on the surrounding tasks aside from coding. Yes?
So does the code upgrade tool analysis stuff that you do identify what has been overlaid versus the new object? Does that make that process easier of identifying what needs to be refactored?
Yes, the question was, does the code upgrade tool identify what has been overlaid versus what isn't overlaid so that you can identify the things that you might need to convert to extensions? Yes, is the answer. It does. The code upgrade tool doesn't like overlays. So one of those tabs is that. Executing the data upgrade, I will have to move a little bit more quickly because I realize I'm running out of time. Executing the data upgrade, obviously make sure that the pre-upgrade checklist, where we're filling in the UPNs on the users at the moment, is completed already. Otherwise, no point in doing the upgrade. No one will be able to log in. You move the 2012 database to SQL Azure and execute the data upgrade package. I mentioned when someone asked a question earlier that the specifics of the move are still subject to change at the moment, so I'm not going to go into how that will or won't work because we're keeping our options open. But for the execution of the data upgrade package itself, how many of you have upgraded a Dynamics 365 for operations environment from, say, RTW to 7.1 or something like that? So the data upgrade process that you run in that, okay, so a few of you, the data upgrade process you run in that's the same. It's just a deployable package, which for anyone who hasn't done it or hasn't got experience with Dynamics 365 yet, the deployable package is basically, it's the same like you're deploying new customizations to an environment. It's the thing that your build server pumps out. In the data upgrade situation, it's a package that comes from us, and it has a special step in it that executes data upgrade scripts.
You are going to execute in production environment in the cloud.
Yes, the question or the statement was, we will execute it when it's production, and that is when it's production environment, that's correct. When you're running this on a dev machine for the first ever time for a 2012 customer, it's you. When you're running it in sandbox environments that are deployed in Azure, Dynamics 365 for Operation sandbox environments that are deployed in Azure, if it's production, it's not you. If it's the non-production environments, it is you that runs it. We're in the process of automating that anyway, so it won't actually be us or you that runs it if it's an Azure environment soon. The system will run it for you.
So this means that on the premise situation, the customer or partner have to launch the scripts?
Yes. So the question was...
If the customer is going to have the on-premise scenario and is migrating from instance in 12, it happens that the partner will have to execute the scripts.
So the question was, if you're running Dynamics 365 for Operations on-premise, then you have to run the stuff yourself?
Yeah.
Most likely, yes. I hesitate to be 100%, because we're very keen, even with the on-premise story, to have LCS manage as much as possible. That's where that hesitation is coming from. Anyway, so the important parts, the data upgrade process, basically command line thing, running a package. The package itself is standard. It's the same package you run on anybody's environment. It doesn't contain any X++ code. It's just a framework. It's the thing that knows how to go and run the X++ code that actually does the data upgrade. We do make fixes to it, so you always have to go and get the latest one before you, or it's always better to go and get the latest one before you run it. The real code that actually does the data upgrade are the release update classes that begin with release update in X++ in your application itself. And you can see all of our ones. It's the same like 2012, actually. Very similar to 2012. So it is spinning up a batch process in the background. It's spinning up a bunch of tasks. They have dependencies, much like previous versions did their data upgrade. Very, very similar. In the next session, we'll talk in more detail about what different kinds of scripts there are and how to write different kinds of scripts. So we'll go into that. The takeaway really for that is, although it's a package that you execute to run the data upgrade process now, the actual inner workings of the data upgrade are the same like they were before. It's still batch, it's still release update classes. It's very, very similar. Skills that you had from previous are transferable. On solving errors, this is another excuse to get a link into a slide that you take away. Running a data upgrade is normally very iterative, especially if it's a large database that's been around for a long time and the data might be kind of dirty. So we've built in specific newer capabilities to help with that iterative process. So resume on failure sounds like something obvious, but it wasn't obvious to start with. Basically means that data upgrade is a specific step in your deployable package. You can resume not just from data upgrade, but within that at a kind of micro step. So you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning and run the thing again after you've found an issue. We record the errors in the database so that we can report on them afterwards. We also record the durations of all of the scripts in the database. We are working on something fancy so that you can see really how the duration looks. And when I say really, I mean they're not all running one after the other, right? So just having the duration doesn't actually give you the picture you need. What you need is the kind of MS Project type view of them, you know, where you can see ones that are running together and ones that are waiting on other ones, and, you know, and the duration's laid out like that. Then you know, oh, it's that one that's actually the one who's causing my overall time to be longer. So we're working on something like that. For the moment, the durations are there. And there's also a configuration flag so that you can skip failed scripts, which is deliberately difficult to turn on. It's not just a command line parameter. You have to go and do some fancy stuff to turn it on. It's deliberately difficult because it's dangerous. It will make it look like it's successfully finished, potentially, you know. It's meant for dev scenarios when you're in that iterative. You want to get as many of the issues out in one go, fix them all before you do another iteration, rather than get to the first critical failure and then just fix that and then run the thing again. And that flag allows you to get as far as humanly possible before you have to go fix stuff and then run it again. When it skips a failed script, it will also skip its children. So you're potentially skipping lots of stuff when that happens. Validate. Similar to the upgrade analysis tool, we have an upgrade validation tool. Now the idea, in a nutshell, the purpose of the validation tool is when you've just made a data upgrade run, you want to know if the run was good or not. So it does a number of simple tests to prove whether the output of that run is worth using or not. And basically, the test that it does is, did the server components come back to life after the upgrade? As in, is it running again? Are they accessible? So it will test whether it can get into MR, AOS, the retail services, SSRS, whether it can actually run something. Is all the data there? Is a good one. And at a high level, does the GL reconcile to the previous version? And does inventory reconcile to the previous version? So none of this is inside AX itself. It's just doing database. For the reconciliation, it's doing database level checks. It's not intended to replace the functional stuff. It's intended to help you decide whether to waste a functional person's time logging into that environment and actually trying to test stuff. So the idea is if the validation test passes, yeah, okay, it should be good enough to go and actually run your real functional tests at that point. Some of these things, particularly is the expected data there, is effectively comparing record counts or entity counts between the two environments to see whether something has gone off a cliff, you know? Whether a load of data in a particular category is missing or what have you. Similar to the types of things we see customers doing by hand in existing upgrade situations, you know? Even if that's just for their own confidence. They've moved this whole thing from one place to another. They want to know, they want to kind of have a tick in a box that says, well, do I still have the same number of whatever entity it was as before? It gives you that, gives you a little bit of that confidence back. This is another one of those pictures which will probably look much different. The report at the moment basically gives you a very high level, did each of these things, were these things successful or not? And then you can drill down into the actual detail behind the data comparison, behind the reconciliation, so on. Now, I mentioned that's not intended to replace a real functional validation, like by users or whatever other method. It's really to prove whether a particular run was good enough to go ahead and do something with or not. If you might wonder why we would do that, because if somebody's sitting there making a run, well then don't they know if it was good enough? Well, it's because we're expecting somebody won't be sitting there doing the run. The computer should do the run. Or your build server will do a run every night when it, based on the code of the day. Does the upgrade still work? And having that kind of validation check means in the morning you know whether the database from there is usable or not without anybody having to touch it. Just to reduce a bit of that, I love anything that kind of removes the administrative tasks from the developer, you know? The time should be spent developing and not running the whatever process or something like that. It's perfect for automation. Just write the code you want, and then in the morning it will have run everything for you, and you can see whether it was good or not without having to waste any of your time doing anything else. This application validation feature is something additional to that. This is some extra checklist steps in the methodology in LCS, but more importantly than that, within the workspace, it provides a new workspace in Dynamics 365 for operations, and it's basically the beginnings of a toolkit to guide people through the functional testing that they need to complete. So it will be, I hesitate to overcommit, but effectively the recommended functional tests from us for the various modules as a way of being able to go in and if you methodically work through that list that we provide, you've tested everything. Obviously, there are some limitations with that. It won't instantly cover every possible feature of the product. There's thousands and thousands of them. It will build on the most popular areas and proliferate from there. It's configurable. You can change what's in there. You can add to it. You can export and import them. So if you build your own favorite ones, you can just use those. That's really aiming for what I would call proper functional validation, you know, the real functional tests that happen, rather than the upgrade validation tool is more about the technical test, you know. Are all the right pieces in the right place? Yes. Do they perform functionally how we want? Well, that's a different question. This bit is aiming to answer that question. Now, the final steps are really nothing to do with the software, they're just process. Cutover testing, you know, as soon as you've got a good data upgrade run, you should start doing your cutover iterations. The likelihood, that what I mean by that, in case people use different phrases, is practicing the data upgrade over and over again until it runs within the downtime window that you have. Obviously, that doesn't happen in all cases. The data upgrade is actually not as bad as one might think. Actually, I don't think I mentioned that. Anyone who did 2009 to 2012 upgrades, the data upgrade was a huge effort, right? Massive task, lots of effort. The schema change between those two versions, between 2009 and 2012, was enormous. We normalized the database. It meant that the data upgrade had a lot of work to do. It was hard. Between 2012 and Dynamics 365 for operations, the schema, it's not 100% the same, but it's roughly the same. So the delta really is very small. We actually upgraded some customers before we even had this, just by taking a 2012 database and pointing Dynamics 365 at it, and it works. I'm oversimplifying, but it basically works. Don't go try that. Please. That might sound fictitious. It depends on what functional features you're using, whether you're using anything that has changed dramatically or not, etc., etc. But the point is, the data upgrade piece of it isn't an enormous effort. But still, the cutover testing is normal. The full functional testing would complete. Both of those things would go into the cutover plan creation. And this pre-go live checklist is, we're just recommending in the final few days before the go live to run another data upgrade run and to have a cutoff for setup changes in the 2012 environment. No more config change type stuff, so that you're reducing the chance of anything changing when you actually go live. Does anybody have any questions? Wow. If I say you, you're both going to think it's you because you're really close to each other? My right. Okay. What's the minimum CU? There is no minimum CU, any version of R3. That was just, the question was, what's the minimum CU in 2012 R3 for upgrade? There is no minimum CU, any R3. Sorry, sir, you're next. Okay. So the question was, are we going to provide XPO to XML widget to be able to, say, export a particular class from 2012, specifically in a context where you're maintaining lots of code, the same code for lots of versions at the same time? Officially, no, but come and talk to us afterwards. Maybe that exists. Okay. I know I'm over time and you're all trying to escape. When you see the slides, there are a few slides at the end that just give you a bunch of useful links, and a link to the fact that the immediate next session in this room is also about the same topic. And obviously our email addresses if you would like to ask us about something offline. Thank you very much.